Sarah Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto the docking bay of Nexus Station, her boots clicking against the metallic floor with a sound that seemed impossibly small in the vast space. The station was a marvel of engineering, a massive ring-shaped structure that served as the galaxy's premier trading hub and neutral meeting ground. But today, it hosted something far more exciting than trade negotiations: the annual Galactic Strength Trials. Sarah adjusted the strap of her equipment bag and looked around at the other beings filling the docking bay. Her heart sank slightly as she took in the sheer size of her competition. Towering above everyone else were the Gorvani, massive humanoid aliens that stood nearly 12 feet tall. Their skin was a deep purple-black, like polished obsidian, and their muscles bulged beneath form-fitting combat suits. Each Gorvani looked like they could bench-press a small vehicle without breaking a sweat. Next to them, the Korith delegation looked almost modest at 8 feet tall, but their chitinous exoskeletons gleamed with an intimidating metallic sheen. Their forearms moved with mechanical precision as they checked their gear. The HFY floated past, their serpentine bodies undulating through the air using some form of natural anti-gravity. Even they were massive, each one easily 20 feet long. And then there was Sarah, 5 feet 6 inches of human determination in a simple gray jumpsuit. "Excuse me, little one," rumbled a voice from above. Sarah looked up to see a Gorvani warrior looking down at her with what might have been amusement. His translator collar rendered his words in crisp standard, but she could hear the bass undertones of his natural voice. "Are you lost? The observation decks are that way." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I'm not lost. I'm Sarah Chen, representing Earth in the trials." The Gorvani's expression shifted from amusement to confusion, then to something approaching pity. "Surely there has been a mistake. The trials are for warrior species only. You are—" He paused, searching for diplomatic words. "Quite small." "Small is relative," Sarah replied calmly, though her pulse quickened. She'd expected this reaction, but experiencing it firsthand was different from preparing for it in simulation. A crowd was beginning to gather. Other Gorvani approached, drawn by the curiosity of seeing a human claiming to compete in their sacred trials. Sarah found herself surrounded by a forest of purple legs, each one thicker than her entire torso. "This is Korvax Grimwall," the first Gorvani said, gesturing to an even larger individual who had just approached. Korvax stood at least 13 feet tall and wore the ceremonial scars of a tribal champion. "He holds the record for the strength trials. Korvax, this tiny being claims to represent Earth." Korvax looked down at Sarah with eyes like glowing embers. When he spoke, his voice was so deep it made her ribcage vibrate. "I have heard of Earth, a small world with small beings, very small beings." He crouched down, bringing his massive head closer to her level. "Little human, do you understand what the trials involve? Contestants must lift the great stone of Kurthak. It weighs 7,000 units. Then they must carry it across the arena of judgment while other contestants attempt to stop them. The current record holder managed to carry it 300 meters before falling." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm aware of the requirements." "The stone weighs more than 50 of you," Korvax continued. "Even if you could somehow lift it, which is impossible, you would be crushed the moment another contestant touched you. We are not trying to humiliate you, small one. We are trying to prevent your death." More aliens had gathered now. The Korith clicked their mandibles in what Sarah recognized as their version of laughter. The HFY swayed hypnotically as they observed the scene. Representatives from dozens of other species watched with curiosity or amusement. "Perhaps," suggested one of the Korith, "the human could compete in the junior trials? Those are for children and smaller species." "There are no junior trials," Korvax pointed out patiently. "And even if there were, look at her. She has no natural weapons, no armor plating, no enhanced musculature. What does her species even excel at? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. This was the moment she'd been training for, mentally, if not physically. She reached into her equipment bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a wrench. The aliens leaned in curiously. "We excel at solving problems," she said simply. The device beeped and projected a holographic display showing the engineering specifications of the Great Stone of Kurthak. Sarah had obtained the blueprints through perfectly legal channels. The trials were meant to be a test of strength, not knowledge, so the information was publicly available. Most species simply never bothered to study it, relying instead on brute force. "Your stone," Sarah said, manipulating the hologram with practiced ease, "is 7,000 units of mass, yes, but it's not solid. It's hollow in several places to reduce weight while maintaining the appearance of massiveness. More importantly, it has these deliberate handholds built into the design." She highlighted several recessed areas on the holographic model. Handholds that are sized for beings much smaller than Gorvani hands. The crowd murmured. Korvax leaned in closer, his glowing eyes studying the display. "Additionally," Sarah continued, "the rules state that contestants may use any equipment they bring as long as it's worn on their person during the lift. They also state that the stone must be moved 300 meters to break the current record. They don't specify that it must be carried." "What are you suggesting, little human?" Korvax asked, though his tone had shifted from condescending to curious. Sarah grinned. "I'm suggesting that humans didn't become the dominant species on our planet by being the biggest or strongest. We did it by being the smartest." She pulled more devices from her bag. A harness that looked far too complex for its size. Mechanical components that fit together with satisfying clicks. A small cylindrical device covered in warning labels. "What is that?" asked one of the Korith. "Portable gravity manipulator," Sarah said casually. "Standard human mining equipment. We use them to move heavy objects in low-gravity environments." She didn't mention that this particular unit had been extensively modified and was operating well beyond its safety specifications. Some things were better left unsaid. Korvax stood slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You believe you can lift the Great Stone?" "I believe I can move it 300 meters, Sarah corrected, "which is what the trial requires." The Gorvani champion was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the crowd had grown to include representatives from most of the competing species. Sarah could feel their attention like a physical weight. Some looked amused, others skeptical. A few seemed genuinely interested in what the small human might accomplish. "The registration period ends in 1 standard hour," Korvax finally said. "If you truly wish to compete, you must register before then. But I warn you, small Sarah of Earth, this is not a simulation or a training exercise. Contestants have died in these trials. Others have been crippled for life. And you," he gestured at her small frame, "you would be the smallest being ever to attempt the challenge." "Every human who's ever done something worth doing was the first to do it," Sarah replied. "Someone has to be the smallest. Might as well be me." She turned and walked toward the registration booths, leaving the crowd of massive aliens behind. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept her stride confident. Behind her, she could hear the rumble of voices as the aliens discussed what they'd just witnessed. The registration booth was manned by a bored-looking centaurian, one of the more humanoid species, though still nearly 8 feet tall. The official looked up from his datapad as Sarah approached, did a double-take, then looked around as if expecting to see her parent or guardian. "Can I help you, young being?" he asked carefully. "I'd like to register for the Galactic Strength Trials," Sarah said, placing her identification documents on the counter. The official examined her Earth passport and competition license with growing confusion. "This says you're an adult of your species." "That's correct." "And you wish to compete in the trials?" "Yes, please." The Centaurian looked at her documents again, then at Sarah, then back at the documents. Need to verify this with my supervisor. He stepped away from the booth and had a hushed conversation with another official. Sarah could see them both stealing glances at her. A crowd was beginning to form again. Word was spreading throughout the station that a human was attempting to register for the trials. Beings who had never heard of Earth were asking their companions about this strange, small species. The registration official returned with his supervisor, a stern-looking being from a species Sarah didn't recognize. The supervisor examined her documents thoroughly. "Everything appears to be in order," the supervisor said finally. "But I must ask, are you certain you understand what you're registering for? The galactic strength trials are extremely dangerous, even for large, powerful species." "I understand the risks," Sarah said. "Very well." The supervisor processed her registration with efficient keystrokes. "You are entered as contestant number 47. The trials begin tomorrow at midday. You'll receive your competitor's packet with all the necessary information." Sarah accepted the packet and headed toward her assigned quarters. Behind her, she could hear the excited chatter of dozens of species discussing the unprecedented situation. A human in the strength trials. It was unthinkable. It was unprecedented. It was exactly what Sarah had been hoping for. Her quarters were small but comfortable, with adjustments for human physiology. As soon as the door sealed behind her, she allowed herself a moment of private panic. Her hands shook as she set down her equipment bag and sank into a chair. Tomorrow she would face the greatest physical challenge in the galaxy. She would be competing against beings who could literally tear her apart with their bare hands. And if she failed, if her calculations were wrong or her equipment malfunctioned, she wouldn't just be embarrassing herself or her species, she might very well die. But if she succeeded, if she could prove that human ingenuity could overcome any disadvantage, it would change everything. Not just for her, but for every human who dreamed of competing on the galactic stage. Sarah took a deep breath, opened her equipment bag, and began final preparations. She had work to do. Outside her window, Nexus Station hummed with activity as beings from across the galaxy prepared for tomorrow's trials. In bars and common areas, the topic of conversation was the same everywhere, the tiny human who thought she could compete with giants. Dawn cycle on Nexus Station brought with it the electric atmosphere of competition day. Sarah woke before her alarm, her mind already racing through equipment checks and calculations. She'd slept fitfully, her dreams filled with massive stone blocks and towering alien warriors. But now, in the quiet of her quarters, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She pulled on her competition suit, a sleek black garment that incorporated her various devices and modifications. The gravity manipulator was disguised as a belt buckle, its power cells distributed throughout the suit's fabric. The harness system was woven into the suit itself, invisible unless you knew what to look for. To casual observation, she looked like she was wearing nothing more exotic than a well-fitted jumpsuit. Her door chimed, and Sarah opened it to find a small floating drone hovering outside. The mechanical voice was crisp and official. "Contestant Chen Sarah of Earth, you are requested to report to Medical Bay 7 for pre-competition screening. Failure to appear within 1 standard hour will result in forfeit." Sarah nodded and gathered her gear. The medical screening was standard procedure. They needed to ensure all contestants were healthy enough to compete and not using any forbidden enhancement drugs. For most species, this was routine. For a human attempting the strength trials, it was probably the officials covering themselves legally. The medical bay was bustling with activity as dozens of contestants underwent their screenings. Sarah found herself in line behind 3 Gorvani warriors, their massive forms making her feel like a child waiting behind adults. The medical staff, a mix of species trained in xenobiology, moved efficiently through their procedures. "Next," called a Korath medic, his 4 arms allowing him to manage multiple instruments simultaneously. The Gorvani, ahead of Sarah, stepped forward onto a scanning platform. Energy fields washed over the warrior as the equipment analyzed everything from bone density to neural activity. "Clear for competition," the medic announced after a few moments. "Enhanced muscle fiber density within normal range for Gorvani physiology. No foreign substances detected." The process repeated twice more before Sarah's turn arrived. She stepped onto the platform, acutely aware of how much empty space remained around her on the large scanning surface. The energy fields tingled as they swept over her body. She saw several medical staff exchanging glances as her readings appeared on their displays. "Unusual bone density for a human," one commented. "Training adaptation," Sarah explained. "We call it Wolf's Law. Bones strengthen in response to stress." Fascinating. And these neural pathway enhancements? Also training. Humans develop increased spatial awareness and reflexive responses through practice. What she didn't mention was that she'd spent 2 years in enhanced gravity chambers, slowly adapting her body to forces that would normally crush a human. Or that her training had included experimental procedures that pushed the boundaries of what human physiology could endure. Some sacrifices were necessary to compete at this level. "Equipment scan shows multiple mechanical devices," the Korath medic noted. "All within regulations," Sarah said, handing over her equipment manifest. "Standard human tools, adapted for the competition environment." The medic reviewed her documentation carefully. "Gravity manipulation device, kinetic force redistributor, neural interface connector." He looked up at her with compound eyes that reflected surprise. "These are mining tools." "Humans adapt civilian technology for many purposes," Sarah said truthfully. After several more minutes of scanning and verification, the medic stepped back. "Cleared for competition. Though I must note for the record that your physical parameters are far below recommended minimums for this type of contest." "Noted and acknowledged," Sarah replied. She made her way to the competitor staging area, a vast chamber adjacent to the main arena. The atmosphere was tense with pre-competition energy. Gorvani warriors performed warm-up exercises that involved lifting massive weights that would have flattened Sarah instantly. Korath contestants tested their exoskeleton servos with sharp, precise movements. The Vexhai coiled and uncoiled their serpentine bodies in complex patterns. And in the middle of it all, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed in meditation. "Interesting technique," rumbled a familiar voice. Sarah opened her eyes to see Korvac's Grimwall approaching. The massive Gorvani champion moved with surprising grace for something his size. "Mental preparation," Sarah explained, standing to face him. Even with him crouching slightly, she had to crane her neck to meet his glowing eyes. "I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Korvac said. "About your modifications to the stone." Sarah tensed. Had he found some rule she'd overlooked? "I spoke with the competition officials," Korvax continued. "Everything you described is technically legal, clever but legal. And I am curious to see if human cleverness is truly sufficient to overcome the disadvantages of your size." His expression was unreadable. "I confess when I first saw you I thought this was some elaborate joke, but your preparation, your equipment, your knowledge of the rules. You are serious about this." "Deadly serious," Sarah confirmed. "Then you have my respect, small warrior. Few beings would attempt something so dangerous with odds so poor." He paused. "I should warn you, not all contestants will be as sporting as I am. Some species view the trials as sacred. They may see your presence as an insult." As if summoned by his words, another group of Gorvani approached. These ones wore darker armor and moved with aggressive purpose. Their leader, a scarred warrior with cybernetic implants, looked down at Sarah with obvious disdain. "So this is the human that dares to mock our sacred trials," the newcomer said. His translator rendered the words in a flat, emotionless tone, but Sarah could hear the underlying anger in his natural voice. "Grimwall," the warrior continued, "why do you waste time speaking with this creature? It should be removed before it embarrasses itself and our honored tradition." Korvax straightened to his full height. "Battlemaster Thexavor, the human has registered legally and passed all requirements. She has the right to compete." "Rights," Thexavor spat. "What rights do prey animals have in a contest of predators?" He turned his attention back to Sarah. "Human, I will make you an offer. Withdraw now, and we will provide you safe passage home to your tiny world. Refuse, and I will personally ensure that your participation ends quickly." Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but kept her voice level. "Are you threatening me?" "I am offering you mercy," Thexavor replied. "Accept it while you can." "I appreciate the offer," Sarah said carefully. "But I'm here to compete." The Battlemaster's eyes flared brighter. "Then you will learn the price of arrogance." Before the situation could escalate further, announcement chimes echoed through the staging area. "All contestants report to the arena entrance. The Galactic Strength Trials will begin in 15 minutes. The massive doors to the arena slid open, revealing the competition space beyond. Sarah caught her breath despite herself. The arena was enormous, easily a kilometer across, with tiered seating that rose into the distance. The crowd was already massive, beings from hundreds of species cheering and calling out as the contestants emerged. At the center of the arena sat the Great Stone of Kerthak. Even knowing its specifications, seeing it in person was intimidating. The stone was roughly cubic, about 5 meters on each side, carved from black granite and inscribed with ancient symbols. It rested on a raised platform, and Sarah could see the handholds she'd identified in the blueprints, small depressions that would be difficult for large hands to use effectively. A line of markers stretched across the arena floor, showing the 300-meter distance that defined success in the challenge. The current record holder, Korvax, had managed to carry the stone exactly 300 meters before exhaustion forced him to set it down. "Behold the challengers," announced the arena's voice system. 47 warriors from across the galaxy, here to test their strength against the sacred stone." The crowd roared as each contestant was introduced. When Sarah's turn came, the announcer seemed to pause in confusion. "Contestant 47, Sarah Chen of Earth? Species? Human?" The roar faltered as the crowd caught sight of her. In a few seconds, the massive arena fell into an almost complete silence. Thousands of beings stared down at the tiny figure standing among giants. Then someone laughed. The sound echoed through the arena, followed by more laughter, then a mixture of confusion, amusement, and disbelief as the crowd tried to process what they were seeing. "Is this a joke?" someone called out in Standard. "Where's the real contestant?" shouted another voice. Sarah kept her eyes forward, focused on the stone. This was what she'd expected. This was what she'd prepared for. The competition rules were simple. Each contestant would attempt to lift the stone and carry it as far as possible. The order was determined by lottery, and as fate would have it, Sarah had drawn position 43 out of 47. She would compete near the end after watching dozens of other attempts. The first contestant was a Gorvani warrior named Krelthak. He approached the stone with ceremonial solemnity, knelt beside it, and wrapped his massive arms around its base. The crowd fell silent as he planted his feet and began to lift. Even with his incredible strength, the effort was tremendous. The stone rose slowly, Krelthak's muscles straining with the effort. When he finally stood upright with the stone pressed against his chest, the crowd erupted in appreciation. He took his first step forward. Sarah watched carefully, analyzing his technique and timing his movements. Krelthak managed 60 meters before his strength gave out, and he was forced to set the stone down. A respectable attempt, but far short of the record. Contestant after contestant attempted the challenge. The best results came from Gorvani champions, with a few Korith managing impressive distances despite their different physiology. The Vexhai, for all their size, lacked the necessary grip strength and limb positioning. Other species managed only token distances. By the time contestant 43 was called, the arena had settled into a rhythm. The crowd had even seemed to forget about the strange human entry, their attention focused on the more realistic competitors. Contestant 43, the announcer called. Sarah Chen of Earth. The arena fell silent again as Sarah walked toward the stone. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. She could feel thousands of eyes watching her every move, waiting to see what the tiny human thought she could accomplish. Sarah reached the stone and knelt beside it, her hands running over its surface as she located the precise handholds she'd identified. Up close, the ancient granite was warm to the touch, polished smooth by centuries of handling. The inscriptions were worn but still visible, prayers and challenges in a dozen ancient languages. She activated her equipment with subtle movements, feeling the gravity manipulator hum to life against her back. The harness system engaged, distributing load-bearing points across her entire body. Neural interfaces came online, feeding her real-time data about force vectors and structural stress points. "What is she doing?" someone in the crowd called out. "Is she praying?" Sarah placed her hands in the designated grips and activated the gravity field. Immediately, the stone's effective weight dropped to something manageable. Still heavy, but within the range of human capability enhanced by her modifications. She stood, and the great stone of Krelthak rose with her. The arena exploded into shocked noise as the massive stone lifted smoothly into the air, held aloft by a figure that looked impossibly small beneath its bulk. Sarah adjusted her grip, feeling the harness system distribute the weight across her enhanced bone structure. "Impossible!" someone screamed. "How is she doing that?" demanded another voice. Sarah took her first step forward. The first 50 meters passed in a blur of shocked silence and Sarah's own intense concentration. The gravity manipulator was holding steady, but she could feel the enormous strain on her enhanced physiology. Every step required perfect balance and precise muscle control. The weight distribution system built into her suit was working exactly as designed, but even reduced to manageable levels, the stone was still a massive burden. At the 60-meter mark, she passed the distance achieved by the first contestant. The crowd began to murmur, their shock giving way to intense curiosity. How far could the impossible human go? At 80 meters, Sarah encountered her first real obstacle. Battlemaster Thexvor stepped into her path, his massive form blocking her route. According to the rules, other contestants were allowed to interfere with attempts in progress, part of the trial's test of determination and combat readiness. "This ends here, human," Thexvor growled, moving to intercept her. Sarah had planned for this. Without breaking stride, she activated a secondary system in her suit. Micro-thrusters fired in carefully calculated bursts, shifting her momentum and trajectory. The maneuver was designed for zero-gravity mining operations, but it worked just as well for avoiding massive alien warriors. She slipped past Thexvor's reaching arms, the stone's bulk actually working in her favor by forcing him to approach from predictable angles. His size, which had seemed so intimidating, made him slower and less maneuverable in the confined space of her movement corridor. "What?" Thexvor spun around, confused by how quickly she'd evaded him. The crowd erupted in excited chatter. The human wasn't just carrying the stone, she was outmaneuvering trained warriors while doing it. 100 meters. Sarah's breathing was becoming labored, but her equipment was holding steady. The neural interface fed her constant updates on system status, power levels, and structural integrity. Everything was green. She was past the point where most contestants failed due to simple strength limitations. 120 meters. More contestants moved to intercept her, but Sarah's advantages were becoming clear. Her small size let her slip through gaps that larger beings couldn't navigate quickly. Her equipment gave her mobility options that pure muscle power couldn't match, and her preparation meant she knew exactly how to use every inch of the arena to her advantage. A Korith warrior named Zixtal tried to block her path with his 4 arms spread wide. Sarah activated her suit's friction modifiers, reducing her contact with the floor to near zero for a critical moment. She slid between his lower arms like a hockey puck, the stone's momentum carrying her through before he could react. 160 meters. Sarah was breathing hard now, but she was also starting to smile. The plan was working better than she dared hope. Around her, the failed contestants were creating an increasingly desperate perimeter, trying to stop her progress through sheer numbers. 200 meters. The crowd was on their feet now, their earlier amusement replaced by genuine excitement. Whatever they thought of humans, what they were witnessing was unprecedented. No contestant had ever made it this far while facing active opposition from multiple other competitors. Korvac's grim wall appeared ahead of her, and Sarah felt a moment of genuine concern. Unlike the others, Korvax wasn't trying to intimidate her or prove a point. He was simply standing in her path, his expression respectful, but determined. "You have proven your point, small warrior," he said as she approached. "You have exceeded all expectations. But this is where your journey ends." Sarah slowed but didn't stop. "I appreciate the sentiment, Korvax, but I'm not here to exceed expectations. I'm here to win." She activated every system at once. The gravity manipulator redlined its power output, temporarily reducing the stone's effective weight to almost nothing. The harness system redistributed load patterns. The micro-thrusters fired in a complex sequence that launched her upward and to the side in an impossible aerial maneuver. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, Sarah flew through the air above Korvax's head. The massive stone balanced above her like a dancer's partner. The arena fell completely silent as thousands of beings watched a human perform an impossible feat of physics and engineering. She landed gracefully 20 meters beyond Korvax, her equipment already compensating for the landing impact and restoring normal operational parameters. The champion stood frozen for a moment, then began to laugh, a deep, booming sound that echoed through the arena. "Magnificent!" he called after her. "Absolutely magnificent!" 250 meters. Sarah could see the finish line now, marked by ancient pillars that had witnessed centuries of trials. Her power cells were reading 60%, more than enough to complete the distance, but she could also see what awaited her at the end. Every remaining contestant had formed a wall at the 300-meter mark. Gorvani, Korith, Vexhai, and representatives from a dozen other species stood shoulder to shoulder in a living barrier. If she wanted to break the record, she would have to go through all of them, 260 meters. Sarah began to understand something that hadn't been clear from the rule books. The galactic strength trials weren't just about lifting and carrying. They were about proving your right to stand among the galaxy's warriors. And the galaxy's warriors were making it clear that they weren't going to simply let her walk to victory. 280 meters. The wall of contestants stood firm, but Sarah could see uncertainty in their postures. They'd planned to stop a struggling, exhausted competitor at the end of their strength. Instead, they faced a human who had just flown over their champion and showed no signs of slowing down. Sarah stopped at the 290-meter mark and carefully set the great stone of Kurthak on the ground. The arena fell silent again, confusion rippling through the crowd. Was she giving up? Had her equipment finally failed? She straightened up and looked at the wall of aliens blocking her path. "I want to make something clear," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic systems. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone or prove that humans are superior. I'm here because I believe that strength comes in many forms, and the galaxy is big enough for all of them." She gestured to the stone at her feet. "This challenge isn't really about who can lift the most weight. It's about who has the courage to try something difficult, the determination to keep going when it gets hard, and the wisdom to know that there's always more than one way to solve a problem." Sarah reached down and reactivated her equipment. The stone rose smoothly into the air again. "The rules say the stone must be moved 300 meters. They don't say how fast, and they don't say I have to stay on the ground." She triggered her emergency reserves, channeling every remaining system into one final maneuver. The gravity manipulator screamed as it pushed beyond its safety limits. The microthrusters ignited in a sustained burn that would drain her power cells to zero. And Sarah Chen, carrying the great stone of Kerthak, launched herself into the air above the arena. She soared over the wall of contestants in a graceful arc. The massive stone held steady above her head. For a moment that would be replayed in holographic recordings for years to come. A human flew like a bird through the arena of the galaxy's mightiest warriors, defying physics and expectations in equal measure. She landed beyond the 300-meter mark with a solid thump, her equipment automatically engaging landing cushions and impact absorbers. The stone touched down beside her with a resonant note that rang through the suddenly silent arena. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then Korvac's Grimwall began to applaud, his massive hands creating thunderous claps that echoed off the arena walls. One by one, the other contestants joined in. The Korath clicked their mandibles in rapid appreciation. The Vexahai swayed in complex honor patterns. The crowd exploded into noise that shook the very foundations of Nexus Station. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy rose to their feet, cheering for the impossible human who had just redefined what they thought they knew about strength and determination. Sarah stood beside the stone, swaying slightly as adrenaline and exhaustion hit her system simultaneously. Her equipment was completely drained, power cells reading 0 across the board. But she had done it. She had carried the great stone of Kerthak 320 meters, setting a new record that would stand for generations. Korvax was the first to reach her, moving faster than his bulk should have allowed. He knelt beside her, bringing his head down to her level. "Record holder," he said simply. "Champion of the Galactic Strength Trials." "I couldn't have done it without good competition," Sarah replied, her breathing finally starting to normalize. More contestants arrived, forming a circle around her and the stone. Even Battlemaster Thexfor approached, his earlier hostility replaced by grudging respect. "Human," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I thought you were here to mock our traditions. Instead, you have honored them in ways I did not expect." "Your species," added Zixtal, his forearms gesturing expressively, "is small in body but vast in innovation. This is a trait worthy of respect." The arena officials arrived with recording equipment and ceremonial items. As was tradition, Sarah's achievement would be carved into the stone itself, joining the inscriptions left by champions across the centuries. "What message would you like added to the stone?" asked the chief official. Sarah thought for a moment, looking around at the faces, alien and familiar, massive and small, that surrounded her. "Size matters not," she said finally. "Judge me by my size, do you? And well, you should not, for my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is." Several aliens looked confused by the reference, but Korvax smiled, a surprisingly gentle expression on his fierce features. "Earth wisdom?" "Human fiction," Sarah admitted. "But sometimes fiction teaches us truths that facts can't." The celebration continued long into the station's night cycle. In bars and common areas throughout Nexus Station, beings from hundreds of species discussed what they had witnessed. The word human was spoken with new respect, often accompanied by questions about Earth and its people. Sarah found herself surrounded by competitors who wanted to know more about her species, her planet, and her techniques. She answered their questions as best she could, though she was careful not to reveal all the secrets of her preparation. Some advantages were meant to be earned, not given. Late in the evening, as the crowds finally began to thin, Korvax approached her one last time. "You have changed something today. Sarah Chen of Earth," he said thoughtfully. "Before today, the galaxy saw humans as small and weak. Now they will wonder what other impossible things your species might accomplish." "That was the idea," Sarah admitted. "Humans are just getting started in galactic society. I wanted to make sure we weren't underestimated." "Mission accomplished," Korvax replied. "But I wonder, what will you do for an encore?" Sarah grinned, the expression full of human mischief and determination. "Oh, I have some ideas. After all, there are lots of other competitions in the galaxy. The intellectual trials, the speed challenges, the diplomatic games." Korvax laughed, the sound booming through the quieting arena. "The galaxy has been warned then." "The galaxy has been invited," Sarah corrected. "Humans don't want to conquer anyone. We just want to prove that everyone deserves a chance to compete." She looked around the arena one last time, taking in the sight of the great stone of Kurthak with its new inscription, the empty seats that had so recently thundered with impossible cheers, and the alien friends she had made through competition and mutual respect. Tomorrow, she would return to Earth as the galaxy's newest champion. But more importantly, she would return as proof that humans belonged among the stars, ready to face any challenge with intelligence, determination, and the unshakable belief that there was always a way to win if you were clever enough to find it. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. Most of them expected it to be over in seconds. They were about to learn something about humans that the galaxy had never seen before.